Okay, so let's take a quick note that the 2D array is basically the row and column. When we are defining a two-dimensional array, we are actually assigning the rows and column. Okay, just like a regular table, we know that each cell of a table is recognized by its rows and number of columns. Like this cell, it's being denoted as first row and first column, and then first row, second column, the first row, third column, and likewise it's all being denoted with respect to their number of row and column. Like these are the rows and the vertical ones are column. Like I have defined an array like this is a 2D array, and now this I means the number of rows and the j is supposed to be the number of column. Now I'll show you a practical code of a 2D array, and I'll show you that how the code in C language is actually wrote in order to define a 2D array. So let me open up the code blocks. So this is a code for defining a 2D array. Now as always, we are going to declare the variables as they are integers or any fractional numbers. So we're going to be taking the integers like the row, column, I, j, and we are taking this I, j because I have mentioned that the I will be the number of row and the j is supposed to be the number of column. And then in this line you should notice that I have wrote 100 and 100. Now this 100 means that there can be 100 rows at most. There can be any more than that, and there can be any more column than 100 columns. And this line will be asking for the number of rows and columns, and by doing a scanf we'll take the row and column as input, and then we'll be giving the elements for each row and column. Now we'll be taking a nested for loop. As you can see, this is for the rows and this nested loop is for the column. Now you know that the nested loop, it actually runs as a dependent loop. This loop will complete one cycle, and after that this loop will have an increment. So, and then this line means that we'll be taking the elements as inputs, like the first row, first column, and the first row, second column, first row, third column, and so on. And as I have mentioned, this is a nested for loop. So when we have completed all the columns, we have filled all the columns with the elements, then it will move on to the next row, and then we'll be taking the elements for each column again, and when all the columns are filled, we will have an increment, and then we will be moving to the next row. Okay, and then we'll be using another nested for loop, and this time it will be only meant for printing the output and showing the elements with respect to their number of row and the column number. So this is the whole code. As you can see, it's very easy, just you need to know the basics for the nested for loop. Now let me run up this code. Okay, as I have mentioned that we'll be asking for the number of rows and columns. So let's say we give the number of rows as 2 and there will be 3 columns. Okay, now we will be putting all the elements for each cell, like 2, T3, and then 44. Okay, so these are all the elements that we had to put, and now that all the elements have been taken as input, they have been assigned with respect to their number of row and the number of column. For example, this was supposed to be at the first row and first column, and then this element was supposed to be first row, second column, like this. There was 2 rows and 3 columns. Okay, so first row, first column, there is 23, this element, and then the next element is first row, second column, and then first row, third column, and because there was only 3 columns, it will move on to the next row. then comes the second row, first column, and the whole thing is actually happening in that way. As I have mentioned that, like when all the columns are filled with the elements, we will move on to the next row. Likewise, like this one, like when all the columns are fulfilled with the elements, we had an increment in terms of row, like we move to the second column, and again we made another cycle of the columns and they were filled with the inputted elements. So that is how the two-dimensional array actually works. All you need to know is the basics of this nested for loop. I already made a video about it, so if you haven't checked that out, you should. And that's it. That's how you define the two-dimensional array. It's all about the number of rows and columns.